It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogside Network, a show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media business industrial complex as it chugs along. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right, man. It's been another chaotic week for me, but that's become par for the course recently. Certainly a lot of interesting sports stuff. We're drowning in weather down here, all that normal stuff. How about you?
Oh, pretty much the same, I'm about ready to go down the Delaware River in a raft today, which I do once every summer, so I'm excited for that.
Are you by yourself in the raft or
No. There's other people, Steve. I'm not that
Well, I
much
don't
of a-
know. I mean, are you that much
No,
of
yeah,
a,
it's actually
mountain man?
my brother will be there, and then some other friends. I usually do it once a summer with people.
Now, is this a whitewater rafting thing, or is this just a float on a boat thing?
It's more the latter. There's a maybe class 1 mini rapids you have to go through, but it's basically a leisurely stroll down the famous river.
Have you ever done whitewater rafting?
I have, but I don't think anything probably bigger than class 2, I would guess.
I have too. I went up and did it in Idaho once, and it was a long time ago, and I can't remember what class it was, but they were fairly serious, I think, rapids. But the main thing I remember is no, it wasn't in Idaho. It was in Minnesota and Canada in the boundary waters. And what I remember out of this is there's a series up there. There was a series of interconnected lakes, and so you had to carry the boat sometimes like a quarter of a mile to get to the next lake, which was fun. And then one of those was like a very serious rapids thing that we weren't supposed to go through in a metal boat and all this stuff. And so I remember me and my friend just decided, you know what, we're tired of carrying this boat. To hell with the rule. Let's just see if we survive this. And so we floated down the serious rapid rocks and filled and all that in our metal boat. And we made it alive and without owing the rental company for a new boat. So that was good.
That is pretty amazing. If anyone wants a good summer movie recommendation, not current, old movie, Whitewater Summer with Kevin Bacon and Sean Astin. It's out there.
I don't know if I've heard that before.
Yeah, Sean Astin plays this like city kid whose parents make him do like a Outward Bound type of summer camp for boys where they go down the river and all this, and Kevin Bacon is the camp counselor guide, and things go awry in the deep wilderness.
Is this when Sean Astin was even shorter than he is as an adult?
Yeah. No, he's still probably not much older than like 22 or whatever when this movie came out.
So he was like 4'11".
Yeah. So,
the big thing I'm watching now is the death throes of Better Call Saul. You a fan of this show?
Same, of course, yeah.
I'm. Oh yeah. You. That's right. We talked about this before. I was very unsure about the 10th episode. I don't know. I mean,
the black and white one for
it just seemed kind of a bit of a non sequitur a little bit. The spending a whole episode basically on the cabbie seemed kind of out of nowhere, and it makes me wonder where they're going next and whether I'm going to care. And I have to think that they didn't bring Carol Burnett on to spend 2 minutes on camera, so there's got to be more with her.
Well, we know. Here's a couple things we know. We know that, whatever, the guy that plays Walt, and then Aaron Paul, the guy that played, they are going to show
Bryan
up.
Cranston.
That's been confirmed. So we know that there's only 3 episodes left, and we know that they're coming at some point. So we know we're probably going to jump back into the sort of like right into the Breaking Bad timeline. So I don't think we're going to spend all of our remaining time in Omaha.
Yeah, hopefully not. But they've got to resolve the Omaha storyline one way, so we're going to see it again, I think.
Maybe,
I just don't know what they have to resolve. Maybe, I don't know, maybe him walking off literally into the mall, maybe that is the resolution. He will always be conflicted, but he walked away and he solved his problem. Maybe that is the end of it. But I have to think that there's going to be something more, if nothing else, because of Kim Wexler. But Bryan Cranston, I don't understand how they can bring him on in a realistic way. Aaron Paul, yes, because they could charge him, get him charged with drugs possession or something. But I don't know how Bryan Cranston was an innocent chemistry teacher, right before Breaking Bad. So I don't know how they could see him in a restaurant or something, cameo.
Well, the other thing I think we might see is we might jump into Breaking Bad timeline. Like, I wonder if we get Jimmy/Saul's perspective of those early days of their interactions.
It seems a bit disingenuous because the story's been told, and so I thought about that, but why would you do it? If I was a storyteller, I don't know if I'd want to go backwards like that. Oh, there was actually something else we didn't tell you before. Here, look at this. So,
and we still don't know. Okay, so Kim Wexler leaves. And we sort of see the whole destruction of that part of the story.
We don't know she left. We just know she left her.
Left. Yes, they break up or whatever.
Yeah.
We know obviously that Saul becomes ridiculously wealthy as a criminal lawyer, and it's mostly for the cartel. But we don't really, and so we see obviously he's got relationship with the cartel, but we don't really see how he goes from like that the last episode with Kim, them breaking up and all of that, to how mega rich he is, right? Like how in the shorts of the cartels he gets. So there's still some story there about like how he goes full, Saul.
Yeah. And I think the romantic amongst the audience would want to see Jimmy and Kim reunited in the end, but I just think that's not that's not Breaking Bad, at all. So
I think it's completely possible we never see Kim Wexler again.
It's possible. I have to think that they're going to give us some indication of where she went, though, and what happened. I don't think they can just go, boom, they broke up and we never hear from her. I think we're going to at least hear something, maybe not see her, but at least hear she went to Omaha. She did something else. She's working in a 7-Eleven. I think we'll hear, at least know something. I don't think they resolved her storyline very well.
Have you watched that little parody they did of American Greed, the Saul Goodman story?
No, what is this?
You can find it. It's just like a little 10-minute fake American Greed, like those cheesy reality docu-series.
Yeah.
And so this one's about Saul, and they did like a 10-minute spoof of it. And so it's all these talking heads and people that were like characters on the show.
Is this like a fan YouTube thing? Or
No. This is like a little like extra thing that AMC did.
Oh, I gotta look at. Yeah, I'll look at that. So anyway,
wherever you watch it go, it's probably just there as like a little like mini feature or whatever.
Yeah, I'll go watch that because that's interesting. But you're welcome to the Better Call Saul analysis hour. Right. Maybe we should have done that show, Chris.
It'd be fun. Yeah, gives you plenty to talk about. That's for sure. We'll put a cap on it here. I see where it was like a little bit of a sidestep. You end with like the crazy episode that came before that and all of the kind of like monumental plot things that happen, and then you're like, walking through this day in the life of what's his name in Omaha?
Takovic.
Yeah, that's right. But
it's a bit of a literary denouement that's just felt kind of strange and out of place.
Although it was a classic. I love the scam. I mean, all the setup to the scam and the walk through this. Just the actual, slipping Jimmy of it all. I thought was actually pretty brilliant.
It's the most slipping Jimmy thing ever.
Yeah,
and there's no small amount of irony in that. The end was when the guy slipped.
Yeah,
he literally slipped.
Totally. But here, I'll walk us back to sports in that I thought it was brilliant how they weaved in all that University of Nebraska college football talk and how he had to like learn it. But the quarterback that they were talking about was real, and he's apparently a software app developer now in California.
Well, that guy they're talking about, I think, had some. I can't remember his name off top. I think he had some
Martinez
injury.
or something like that. Was that who?
Yeah. I think he had some injury or something that kept him out of the NFL, if I recall. And there was that other quarterback from that era at Nebraska, who was sort of before his time, African American guy who was a runner. Remember him? And
vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, and that guy I think also got hurt. But I do anyway. But I know the real Better Call Saul nerds looked up the games and figured out, all of that, which I'm not that into it.
Can you imagine being that guy though? Like your phone's blowing up, like whatever Monday night, like you're plot point in Better Call Saul.
Did they pay you?
Yeah, right. Name, image, likeness. All right. Well, we go from the fake pseudo criminal to the real world pseudo criminal, and catch up with our boy Daniel Snyder. Who probably could use a Saul Goodman every once in a while on his side. I'd be happy to take his work, I would imagine. But wow, as we had a lot of Dan Snyder news in a way, and no Dan Snyder news in a certain way. But he talked.
Yeah, so Danny has been floating around on the Med on a big, expensive luxury yacht. He's been spending time in Israel. He's off some island off the coast of Italy, apparently. All this according to Dan Snyder's, what is it? Dan Snyder Yacht Tracker, I think, is the Twitter page.
The Twitter account.
Yeah, and I still want to know how these people track, private yachts, but it doesn't matter. So the important thing is that Danny finally did a deposition with this congressional committee that shouldn't exist. The big debate was whether or not Dan would be on the record as a subpoenaed witness or as a voluntary witness, and that is important because Danny has a bunch of non-public, non-disclosure agreements in which prevent him from talking about certain aspects of this controversy. And if he voluntarily testifies, the contract prevents him from talking. But if he's subpoenaed, he can talk. And so that is why he has been dodging. He's been on the lam for all this time. It's because he doesn't want to be compelled to talk about absolutely everything. But apparently, according to his lawyer, he did answer every question. He was on the stand via remote, like Zoom from Israel, I think, for about 11 hours. Rick Snyder made the point to say that's a long time, but listen, having deposed a lot of people, that isn't that long. Okay, I mean, now Congress may not have this limit, but Texas has a limit to how much you can testify on the record. But basically, if you factor in complex testimony, several breaks, and a long lunch, which is what normally happens, you're there all day. So that's not surprising. But the transcript hasn't been released. The video hasn't been released. So we have no idea what he said, which is why Chris said we didn't learn much of anything. So that's that. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, add his 10 plus hours of testimony to those things we'd love to get our hands on. We add him along the lines of that cache of emails out there, the Gruden email cache, and some other things. So super interesting. I loved how his lawyers made a point of saying, he answered every question, and the 10 hours wasn't because we were in constant sidebar about whether he should answer things or not. So, of course, Snyder loves and his team love the proactive, make me look good public statement ahead of other things. It's like one of their go-to moves. So I thought that the Snyder camp's post deposition statement was pretty interesting. Sorry, not the NFL. The Congress did not do something similar as of yet. I am kind of curious. I think the thing to watch for will be what they do decide to release. And I'm not saying necessarily video, but like information. Was there new revelations? Do they, what does come out of this from that? 10 hours, I was a little bit like, wow, that's not a short one, but I also know that those things can go wrong. So I didn't think it was crazy, but I did think it was notable. Yeah, I mean, we'll see if, it could ultimately potentially be a win for Snyder if he's basically like, hey, I complied, they got what they needed. They haven't actually released much. Nothing's really come over it. Most people watching this don't think this is going to move the needle significantly in his ouster, and in some ways it could solidify his position.
Number one, I have done many 10-hour depositions personally. So there's that. But number two, I do think that they're going to release the entire transcript. They did for the other witnesses. I read all those transcripts for all the rest of them. So I think they're going to do the same thing to Snyder. But really, though, I think the important thing here is, what is the end game for this committee? put aside the fact that I hate the fact that it exists out of my anti-government, small government kind of line of thinking, way of life. Put that aside. What is this committee doing? Most of these committees are doing investigations like this because they're studying the possibility of new legislation. This committee appears to be like some sort of quasi-governmental DA something. So, there's never been clear to me what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so, yeah, great. You got Snyder on the record. So what? I mean, are they going to refer something to the Department of Justice? Are you going to propose an anti-Dan Snyder bill? I mean, what are we doing here, and why did they do it? And I don't know if anybody has an answer to that.
Yeah, no, I don't. Their end game or goal has never been clear, really, to me. And you're right. Like the auspices of this, which is workplace safety or sexual harassment in the workplace, and even in the construct where if it can happen in the NFL, it can happen anywhere, which is obviously the truth. But you go after a big, huge target, and then make an example of that, and then build legislation or build whatever from that. But that's never been clear, and it seemed like they became a little bit obsessed with Snyder and lost the big goal here, which is that you might have brought in some other companies that were running through trouble or whatever. You'd build a bigger picture and then suggest legislative action against that. So that has never really been clear past the early days. And once this focused on the NFL, and quite frankly, once it focused on Snyder, because they really in my mind, they let Goodell, kind of off the hook pretty easily, all things considered, and really seemed like they were zeroing in on Snyder. So we'll see. I also think, as we mentioned the last time we talked about the story, that the timeline is, most likely short on this regardless, just on the regular, machinations of Congress and the voting public. So I don't even really see you'd think there'd be some sense of urgency, which we might see now because they have the deposition under their belt. They do something to wrap it up so they can claim some kind of victory, even if the victory is just embarrassing him. Now, that was all. This was fine with me if it helped get a different end game, which is, I'll take their help in getting Snyder out. But it's not but unless they really have some body blows, I think it all becomes a side circus, which is right now, at least, they don't have any body blows.
Yeah, but it already is a circus, and I just don't understand where they're going. What would have made more sense to me is if this committee had been an investigation of the mistreatment of women in American professional sports. Just something like that. And yeah, then, okay, so Washington's kind of front and center with that. But look at the NBA and look at MLB and, have you had complaints about office people in the NHL? And, that would have been more reasonable. And then could there be some sort of legislation about that? Possibly. But this one is, Congress doesn't or shouldn't and is prohibited from passing bills that affect one particular company. You can't pass like the anti-Chris Lawrence bill. That's not how Congress works. That's illegal. And so, what are they going to ask the NFL to ask the owners to ask him to leave? I don't get it. It's a big waste of government resources and public funds, if you ask me. Unless Dan Snyder admitted to a crime that is a federal question, a breach of federal criminal law, I don't know what is next. Like you said, I think basically they have to wrap it up and declare victory one way or the other, because what Chris is talking about is, if the polls hold true to form, the House of Representatives is going to be in the hands of Republicans after the election, so it'd be in January. And at that point, the committee is over because not one of these Republicans on this committee think it's worthwhile to do. So, yeah, they're time limited here. And I think you're right. I think there's going to be some report, ooh, he's awful. And look, we did a good job. And, that's it.
Yeah. And I even think if they really wanted to be effective here, the NFL would be more in their crosshairs than Snyder.
That's right.
There's enough there's enough already on Snyder. Not necessarily enough to get to the other 31 owners to oust him. That's not my point. There's enough there where you would go, okay, NFL, your handling of this is actually the workplace, problem.
Well, that's my point. That's a
Yeah.
bigger. You could. I still don't think it's a congressional issue, but you could. There's a much better argument that is a congressional issue. If all across, the most popular sport in America, there's a systematic oppression and a mistreatment of women. That's at least more of a congressional question, right? The problem with the Goodell thing is that these congressmen don't have the ability to effectively question witness. Even if some of them happen to be attorneys, very few of them were prosecutors, very few of them were serious trial attorneys. All of them want to just grandstand. You can't question a witness like Roger Goodell in like 2 hours, and have those 2 hours, like 20 minutes was legitimate questioning of him. That's just not going to result in anything. And Roger Goodell beat him like a drum. He's smooth, he's slick, he's got the most expensive lawyers, he's well prepared. He knew exactly what to say nothing. And to really get someone like that, you have to have, the Matlock out there, to really be the one questioning him. And that's just not Congress at all. And that's probably what happened to Snyder. Snyder's not very smart, all of that. We know that. But I doubt they had any serious trial attorney level deposition stuff going on with him.
Well, we won't know till we know at this point. So now, again, things we don't know that are very interesting. Pile has gotten larger because I think everyone would love to have any details that we can get, if and when, about what happens. Because till we know that, it's all speculation. So
the real question is Snyder going to return from his month-long sojourn into the Med? Now, oh, look, the trip is over mysteriously. He's back because the season is starting.
Right, and if you see that, and that's not and he's not served the second he steps off, the yacht or whatever.
Why would they? I mean, they already got him on the record.
Right, unless there's something that was revealed or whatever. But yeah, so we'll see. I think it means he's free to return for the season, which in some ways, if you actually are tracking this as a fan of the team or a fan of Snyder no longer being involved in the team, it's kind of a net negative, because there was part of me that was looking forward to him not feeling comfortable returning at any time this fall, which means he was just further away from the team.
Well, yeah, he's got to be embarrassed by even Dan's big of a narcissist as Dan Snyder is. Doesn't he have any shame at all? I mean, I don't know if I would want to show my face in public on the sidelines at practice or in games after all this. I mean, maybe there's some sort of humility out of this that's going to keep him away, but it just depends on how big his narcissism is, or how deep, rather.
Well, no one's got. Yes, I imagine his narcissism runs pretty deep. So we'll see. So the intrigue will continue to patter on, and it'll probably give us something to talk about in 2 weeks. So I think
he's going to have to. I think what he's going to have to do is go hire 20 hookers to just make him relax.
Yeah, right.
And get over his stressful deposition day.
Well, hopefully someone in the press or somewhere is on that, so we can that can get revealed and he can get ousted. But we'll see. So Snyder marches on is the only real outcome here. But we had, in the world of quarterback quarterback contracts, we had a pretty important piece with Kyler Murray signing a new kind of mega contract, but one that seemed pretty in line with where quarterback contracts are going. Amazingly enough, it's nowhere near as good as the Deshaun Watson deal, which is still just mind bending that he's the king of the leaderboard right now and kind of always, in terms of guaranteed money, in terms of years, in terms of all kinds of stuff. But Kyler Murray did get a pretty good contract. The Baltimore Ravens should probably breathe a somewhat sigh of relief, because I think it helps to slot where Lamar Jackson is probably going to end up. But that wasn't the real interesting part of his contract. That was all pretty status quo. No one was that surprised by those aspects. But one aspect that did catch people's attention was that he had a homework clause, essentially, in it, which they said that he he was contractually bound to do at least 4 hours of film study a week to maintain the good graces, to be within, to stay within his contract. And that has recently been dropped after that became embarrassing for all involved.
I've read some NFL contracts, and I've obviously been closely following the salary cap for the duration of the Hogsty. I've never heard of such a clause. So first of all, Murray's contract was 5 years, $230.5 million, $160 million guaranteed. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned what's his name, the hooker guy, the masseuse guy, Deshaun Watson. 100% guaranteed. What an idiotic! That might be the worst contract in American sports history, really. But regardless, that's another topic for another day. So Kyler Murray, yeah, the homework clause, and it wasn't just 4 hours of study; it was 4 hours of independent study. That's what it said. Meaning that his time spent in the film room in the quarterback room doesn't count.
Right.
And what does this tell you? This tells me that they were worried about his work ethic. And Kyler is a guy who's relied on his athleticism his entire career as a football player. He's obviously a much better athlete. Don't going all the way back to high school, to Pee Wee, to college. He's the best athlete on the field. And guys like that sometimes are not great students of the game. Look at RG3. He runs around. He's an athlete. Is he a Dan Marino-like sleuth on the field? No, that's Kyler Murray too. So, and I do think it's interesting that they took it out. And so what that means, by the way, is there's a contract amendment that says this paragraph is deleted. That's what, when they say take it out, that's what they meant. I just think it shows a weird simultaneous lack of faith in him, while at the same time signing him because they know he's probably too hard to replace. And the other thing I'd be worried about is Murray. He's only 5'8". I don't care what. That dude is not 5'10". At some point, he's going to get hurt, and that's another question. But I've never seen it before, and I think it's weird that they would show a lack of faith in his preparation skills, yet give him $160 million guaranteed.
And then, because it probably a little bit on both sides of the fence here, to be a little bit have to be in scramble mode when this inevitably hits the media, and not like nobody involved from any parts of this negotiation and an eventual contract, settlement was like, this is going to look real bad, and it's going to look bad because why is the team embarrassing a player that just invested this much money in? Like, why are they wiping their nose in it? It's going to look bad, obviously, for Murray that this is even needed. And especially if you're going to pull it, 2 days later after it becomes public knowledge, then what was any of this worth it? At least if you thought it was that important to the contract, you stick to your guns and say, hey, that this is these were the terms that we felt like we needed with Kyler to make this successful, and we're sticking by this contract. If you're this quick to pull it, then why go through any of the sort of multi-directional harm?
They didn't even say, hey, this was a mistake. You could have told some story. Whoops, this was a draft and we signed the wrong one. We had an administrative problem. The secretary got fired.
Track changes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You could have said that. They didn't say any of that. They just literally just bowed down to the pressure of it. And newsflash, they leaked the contract. Okay. Kyler Murray didn't leak the contract. Kyler Murray's agent, I can't imagine his agent would have done it. That's
that doesn't do them any good.
No, right. Yeah. Look at the horrible contract I negotiated. No. And so the team leaked it. But it's always a bad look. I subscribe to the Kid Rock theory of public interaction, in that if somebody asked him, aren't you afraid of getting canceled? This was about a month ago. And he said, no, I'm not afraid. He's speaking in words that I don't use, but he said, no, I'm not afraid. I'm uncancelable. Because he said, I just don't care whatsoever. And I think that's what the Cardinals should have done, is follow Kid Rock's lead and just said, hey, it's in the contract. We have no reason to think he won't do this, but we felt it was important to put in there, and that's it. They didn't even, there's no explanation for taking out other than his tender feelings got hurt. If his tender feelings got hurt, he should have not signed the contract in the first place. Nobody held a gun to his head. So I think the team looks ridiculous, but that's also the Arizona Cardinals for you.
Yeah, no, and it's like if they did, because it obviously came from their side. And so what's the motivation there? Was the motivation there to say, hey, we know we just gave this guy a big contract, but we know there's still some question marks, see playoff game. So we covered our backside here. Are they trying to like win some kind of like, not the general public, but the NFL public's like respect by like, playing it by on both sides, and they say, hey, one of those like sort of Fredo Corleone moves, like, hey, we're smart, we have these guardrails on this guy that we just gave this huge contract to. I guess that was their motivation, which was ridiculous because the narrative before this, whatever the 24, 48 hours when it was just, oh, look at this contract, another big quarterback piece slots in financially, was that, this was a pretty sensible deal all the way around. Kyler obviously got paid, but it wasn't a franchise crippling contract, and it sort of brought a little bit of sanity back to the quarterback market. They were already getting kudos. This leak blew that all up.
Yeah, and again, I mean, there's no other explanation for them getting rid of that clause other than they bowed down to the pressure, to public pressure. And I just think it makes them look silly because I agree they thankfully gave a reasonable, within the universe of quarterbacks, they gave a reasonable contract because nobody in the NFL wants Deshaun Watson's contract to become the norm. Even forget about the fact that he's in trouble with 50,000 different massage therapists. Even putting that aside, a fully guaranteed $230 million contract is not what the NFL wants. You're going to get turned into the NBA if you do that. So, I mean, this was a dose of reality, as you said. I just don't understand it all. There's no way I would have advised the ownership of the Cardinals to do that. I just say, look, Kyler, we paid you. I'm sorry you don't like it. You shouldn't have signed it. If you didn't like it, deal with it and get back at, stop talking to us and get on your iPad,
And or don't be petty to begin with going into the contract, right? Like like it's a poison pill that they didn't even have to, there's other ways to skin that cat, or
they're
if
not going to default him.
Strongly, don't sign him.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to default him based on this.
Yeah.
There's no way they're going to do that. And how are they even measuring this? Do they have some big brother thing on his iPad? I mean, does he have to report this data once a week? It was a petty thing in the first place. And I agree that if they had so little faith in him, why'd you sign him?
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. It was it was a total step on the rake move too, because they were good. Like, oh, look, they did it. The Cardinals didn't blow up their team, and they kept their investment. And then suddenly, this nonsense. It did remind me that.
But then to get rid of it is doubly worse because it makes them look even more foolish.
Yeah. Why? Yeah. If you caved this quickly, why are we even talking about this at all? It did make me think that because years ago, when we talked about the Mahomes contract, which sort of set the bar. But how smart does that contract look now? Because I mean, that's the most sensible quarterback contract in the league.
I don't know if I agree
at that
with
level,
you.
top tier level.
Well, the reason why I'm not sure I agree with that is that if you really look at it, I wrote a column about this that I ended up not publishing. The contract is sort of a de facto full guarantee almost as it is, because how they have the Mahomes deal structured is that he's got guaranteed roster bonuses that become guaranteed like 2 years ahead of time, all the way through to almost not quite the end, but almost the end of the term. And it was 10-year term, remember? And so to get rid of him, and there are huge, enormous numbers, which really do damage to his dead cap space, which is the key to getting rid of a player. And so to get rid of Patrick Mahomes would either mean a difficult trade or planning 2 years ahead of time. So it's Mahomes has got them in a box. I don't know if it's a great contract for the Chiefs.
I don't know. I think I'd rather have that contract and that player than a lot of these other, I'd rather
certainly a full guarantee for a dude in trouble with a bunch of massage therapists. Sure, absolutely.
But and just in the world of contracts, of quarterback contracts, I mean, they've already, it's already sped way past that one.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, and he still probably has the highest ceiling of a lot of these guys, and better track record.
Mahomes?
So
Yeah,
if you're going to
absolutely.
bet, if you're betting on one of them, he's probably, the smartest bet.
I've never been a Murray fan particularly. I just think at some point his size is going to come back to haunt him. I mean, we've never had in the history of the NFL, dating back to the early years, a 5'8" quarterback who's been able to last. He's just too small, I think.
Well, the Cardinals are, I mean, they're doubling down at all because they gave Cliff Kingsbury a contract extension too, which, you'd have some NFL experts that would have said he should have been on the hot seat, not getting an extension. So, and looked just as embarrassed, bad, and unprepared in that playoff shellacking as Murray did. So it's interesting what they're doing, or just dumb.
This is the Bidwell family too, remember?
Yeah.
Because it's what is it, Steven? I think he's the son.
Yeah, it's second generation Bidwell.
Yeah, and so I think stupidity is genetic, because Bidwell was one of the worst owners in the NFL, and the Suns aren't much better. Look, there's a reason why teams like the Redskins and the Lions and the Cardinals never win. They may get lucky for a year or two here and there, but these programs are losing programs, and the reason ultimately is, in my opinion, is that it has bad ownership. Winning starts from the top. And so if you have an idiot like Bill Bidwell and then the son of idiot and Stephen Bidwell, and then you're at a competitive disadvantage. And this is why teams like that do things like this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We have some of these owners, and Bidwell was this, the Snyder of the 80s, or, a version of Snyder of the 80s to a large degree in early 90s. And, we've got it in Indianapolis. We've got it in Arizona. We've got a version of it. I don't think the daddy narrative is quite the same, but we have a version of it in Las Vegas. These sort of reputation washes of the second generation where, their fathers. Raiders are a little bit of a side case, but where their fathers were, kind of like real vilified, like real like bottom tier owners of their day, but they've kept it in the family, and the kids have not full reputation wash, but they sort of steered them into being just mediocre, franchise ownership.
You know what the best example of this is? The Los Angeles Lakers.
Oh, with Ginny Buss?
So Dr. Jerry Buss is the guy who was driving the ship through the Showtime era, through the Kobe Bryant era. And he's the guy who was the owner in all 10 of their titles. He died 5 or 6 years ago, whatever, maybe more, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe. He has a son who's an absolute, just like, and yeah, that's not politically correct. Sue me. How about that? If that makes everybody feel better. And he really screwed up the roster and everything. Jeannie Buss is in charge because she initiated a hostile takeover of the team and threw her own brother out. But what has happened with the Lakers since Jerry Buss died? They are mediocre in terms of results on the court. Their roster is a disaster. They don't have any upside to the team. LeBron James is old. There's involved. I keep seeing headlines about Russell Westbrook trades, and it's just constant nonsense and drama. All of that stems from the top. It's an unclear, unsure ownership situation. That, to me, is the best example of what you're talking about in sports, American sports.
Yeah, and if you watch Winning Time, they start to hint at how idiotic the Suns are. They start setting that up even in that.
Yeah, even in the one season, they kind of did. Yeah.
So you will see. I think if you leave all the nonsense about the homework clause on the side, I think I think you did see a move to sanity in quarterback contracts, and you also see where a guy like Kyler Murray, who they've obviously invested in already, who obviously has lots of upsides and a couple potential tragic flaws. They just, you can't let these guys walk. And, these teams are over a barrel, sometimes when you've got, especially these ones where you drafted them, 3/4 of the feedback looks good, but a quarter of it could really come back and bite you. But, you got to open the checkbook for these guys. That's just the league right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the NFL. There's teams like Washington that have been hunting for a quarterback for more than a generation. When you come across one that's in the ballpark, because Kyler has big upside. Don't get me wrong. I do think he's too small, but I mean, from an on the field perspective, he was a legitimate quality pocket passer in college. Granted, I know he's a runner and all that stuff, but he's a legit quarterback. So yeah, once you come up with you find a guy like that, I think they had no choice but to sign him. But the homework's to all this. I mean, we've said enough, but I mean, the homework thing is just a very poorly managed team thing to do.
It's so funny. So the next story we move into, there's a lot happening. So, well, Steve, you'll tell us here. When is officially the Major League Baseball's trade deadline?
Oh no, you had to. I will look it up. I don't know the answer. Give me a second.
It's soon.
I will look it up. Yeah, it's very soon.
It's coming.
Now, let me just explain, by the way, before you go into what that is so what he's talking about is there's a deadline before which they can trade players without having to put them on waivers. Okay. And so you can trade, you can do trades after the trade deadline. But the trick is you have to waive the player first. And so then that allows teams to claim those players. Like sometimes teams will waive like very senior. They'll put a very senior, very good player on waivers just to see what happens. They don't really want to trade, and they'll yank him back off before the waiver deadline. Here it is. Okay, so Tuesday, August 2nd. So by the time you hear this, the non-waiver trade deadline will have passed.
So the only story, I mean, I'm sure there'll be other trades, but the only real headline grabbing story is what will happen to the Washington Nationals' Juan Soto, who, considering that he just turned down, he and Scott Boras, it's important to say, just turned down the latest contract offer from Washington Nationals for an extension. He's still under contract for another 2.5 years, by the way. Extension means that lots of baseball people and the rumor mill has it that Washington would do best to trade Juan Soto now because his return will be the highest. The team that gets him, who realistically he probably will not sign a contract with anybody unless they really throw the moon at him, that he wants to hit free agency. We know what Scott Boras does. But if you are a big market team, you trade for him now, you get 2.5 years and maybe even 3 playoff appearances out of him. And even if he walks out of that, you might have gotten some value. So the Nationals should trade him now is a school of thought. So we will see what happens with Juan Soto. And it's super fascinating. And this will be the contract, either whether it happens through an extension or when we do actually test free agency with Juan Soto, will set the bar for Major League Baseball contracts. And, Aaron Judge will probably do that here this offseason, and then Juan Soto will probably smash through that at some point, especially considering his age. But the more interesting question for you, Steve, that I have is, the learners are officially selling the Washington Nationals. In fact, that they may not own the team by next year's baseball season, I think, if they had their druthers. So that means it's a very active sale, good asset, a good franchise to have for market, for a lot of reasons. If you're an owner coming in, would you rather have a kind of cleared deck salary, no giant overhead, a ton of prospects, and a chance to sort of build from that vantage point? Or if you're an owner taking over a major market team, a team just a couple years away from a World Series and who's seen lots of its just massive players walk out the door, would you want a Juan Soto locked up, even at a mega deal, to build your legacy with the team moving forward with a piece like that?
I think my personal view is not the standard view in sports. Personally, I would want the Juan Soto type player locked up. But history of sales of sports franchises, American sports franchises, is that they clear the decks before a sale. That happens a lot. The sad fact is most of these owners care more about finances than winning. They may say the opposite, in public, but it's really about money. And so typically, if a franchise is getting ready to be sold, they will clear the decks contractually. So it does not surprise me. Like Juan Soto's deal that he turned down with the Nationals was 15 years, $440 million. And I'm just saying, if somebody offered me that, I would have signed it happily. It's 100% guaranteed. But that having been said, that actually comes out to about 29 million a year, which is obviously a lot, but Max Scherzer got 43 million a year. So I think the reason why Soto turned it down was that it's nowhere near the top in Major League Baseball. So if you give him say 40 million a year for 15, that is 600 million. And so that's somewhere along the lines of what Soto wants. But I think it did not surprise me that the Lerners would not. It surprised me that the Lerners even offered that, really, because I think they would rather sell it at the bottom of the barrel than be saddled with some contract like that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting hypothetical. I think I probably. Well, first of all, if this team was not for sale and the Lerners were just status quo ownership, that they should open the checkbook, because the Nationals have just a horrendous history of letting these guys go. I mean, if you look through the players that have come through the Nationals, and by the way, they had a World Series under their belt. They had a ton of playoff appearances. They were on a pretty good. Those players helped them be competitive, relevant, and ultimately a champion. So not all of them were on that championship team, but the Nationals were relevant for a long time, and now they are completely irrelevant. With Juan Soto, by the way. So that's super interesting. And I think if the Lerners were status quo ownership, you could not let another guy walk, right? It just is. At some point, the fans are just like, what are we doing here? We've had 4 to 5 generational players come through here, or very just high quality baseball players at the worst. So, but I think if I'm an owner in that situation, I think I do want cleared decks, and it would be tough. But here's why I'd want cleared decks, because it's going to take me a couple years to even know how to run this thing. And I don't want to be I don't want to have to feel like I've got to figure it out just because I have Juan Soto, right? If I come in, I'm already going to have to figure it out. The expectations are lower because we got, what most people in the public, the fan base, and even baseball people think of as a pretty empty cupboard, or at least, pretty much just blow it up and start over, which gives me a couple years to flail before I try to have to get it together. And I've already kind of gotten that overhead of failure because there's no expectations, because there's not like, well, you have Juan Soto, build around him, and you should be able to win in 1 or 2 years. I mean, as bad as the Nationals are right now, people are still talking about, well, they could be good in 2 years, right? Like there's even that kind of optimism. So I don't think I'd want that pressure. Now it's going to come down to what the deal is, and maybe by the time you're listening to this, we'll either know that there was a deal or there's a no deal, et cetera, et cetera. But it all sort of comes down to what Rizzo is able to get out of it. But it really is interesting because I could see it cutting either way. And Steve, I think there's no chance this guy signs with, I don't care if it's the Dodgers or the Yankees or whatever. He's not signing an extension. This guy and Boris are going to hit free agency. It doesn't matter what team he's on over the next 2.5 years.
Yeah, well, and the Dodgers don't have room for him on their roster, even if they were so inclined. But yeah, no, I don't think they are. I don't think they want to sign a 15-year deal unless they really just get blown out of the water. Averaging 45 million a year, 50 million a year, and that's just not going to happen. I think he may be giving prospective franchise ownership too much credit, Chris, because what you're talking about makes sense, and I agree with you. But I don't think they care very much about winning and about building a team. They care about the finances. First and foremost, it's about money. Understand that sports franchise owners are businessmen first, and they buy these things out of a combination of money and ego. Very few of them really truly care about the sport. So there's a handful that do, but I think most of them are about winning and money. So I don't know if they would want. I don't think they would want a 15-year deal. And by the way, Soto is a good player and all that. I don't mean to suggest he isn't, but is this guy a Hall of Fame level franchise changing talent? I don't know if he is. I mean, his batting average 291 career. That's good. He's been over, 300 twice. I'm looking at his stats. He's home runs per year 22, 34, 13 in the shortened year 29, 20. So he's averaging high 20s home runs. I mean, he's talented, but this guy ain't Babe Ruth, necessarily. So I don't know if it's worthwhile to do that to a prospective new owner.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think the thing with Soto, if he was, well, what's Aaron Judge? Aaron Judge is probably still like 27, 28. If he was that age, it would be different. I think the thing that makes it stratosphere level in terms of where this could go is just his age, right? Just being 23 or whatever. I mean, the runway, there's more runway even with a player. Isn't in baseball 27's like the magic year age, where like the guys, the sort of even dudes that are showing a lot of potential, it all clicks. So he's 4 years away from that. I think it's just the length of time you may have this guy being this good is the tantalizing piece.
Oh, it is, but I just don't think owners care about that. And Judge is 30, by the way.
Oh, wow, he's 30. Wow.
According to Baseball Reference, Judge is 30.
Wow. And then as we sneak preview things that we might be talking about 6, 12 months from now, but there are 2 teams probably in the Baltimore Washington market that are going to be up for sale. So if we want to look at things, that's just super interesting because the Learners are already selling. That's already an official go. And when Angelos dies, those kids don't want that team. So and he doesn't seem too much longer for the world by all reports. So both those teams are probably in sale and will be a really interesting marker for the valuations of Major League Baseball teams.
Peter Angelos, who is a Bill Bidwell, Dan Snyder level of bad owner. I mean, talk about a team. I mean, talk about an owner who's ruined a franchise, and that's such a great example. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Orioles, but I mean, I feel bad for the fans of the team because they've had some talent in that place too.
Yeah, and they're a storied franchise over over history. So
absolutely, never want to.
Lot of Washington football team Baltimore Orioles comps if you start to sit down and look at it in terms of what happened.
Yeah.
So that'll be. I'm sure we will be talking about the implications of both those sales on this show going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. I just tend to think that the Nationals don't want a bunch of onerous contracts on their books right now.
Yeah, probably not. Steve, tell us what's going on in your Saints podcasting coming up.
The Saints pod. It is still the Hogsty podcast. I have made no secret that I am not a fan of the team anymore. That having been said, I still love talking about football. He's kidding. The reason why he's saying Saints is I told him off the air that I think I'm going to try to watch some Saints games this year, see if I can get behind them a little bit. We'll find out. But the Hogsty will continue. We've talked about the future. I'll save that for the Hogsty, but just safe to say we still have the Hogsty podcast. We still have all of our regular written content. At some point, Rick Snyder, Seasons of Discontent, is going to be back, so watch for that.
All right, so we will see you here on It's Just Business in 2 weeks.